Hello and welcome back. So today we are talking about this book. So this is The Modern Witchcraft Book of Tarot, Your Complete Guide to Understanding the Tarot by Skye Alexander. Now, I have read one other book by this author. It was her book on the runes, and honestly, this is one of the exceptions to my usual rules. If you don't know, when I go into buying any witchcraft books, there are a few things that I keep in mind. Sometimes I will still buy regardless, because it's a topic that I'm willing to give a chance on the author for. And sometimes I'm like, you know what, maybe no. And so some of those things I've talked about them before. I don't think I've mentioned them recently, so we'll just go over them really quick. Is there actually information about the author? If there's not, that's a red flag. Thankfully, there's stuff on the author in here. Number 2, does it come from a well-known publisher, aka Llewellyn and Weiser? Those are kind of the big witchcraft publishers. Outside of that, I start to get hesitant because a lot of publishing houses just leech on to what's trendy, and witchcraft is trendy. And this fell into that category. The publishing house, it's not necessarily a witchcraft one. Number 3 is if a book has a warning at the beginning of the book saying somewhere on like the publication page, like, don't do this. This is for entertainment purposes only. Thankfully, this book does not include that. And then one of the other things that I always check is, do they include their sources? If a book doesn't include their sources, I get very hesitant about it. She doesn't include sources. So it's like half there. Like, she has a lot of the stuff where it's like, okay, we talk about who the author is, it doesn't give a warning, but it's from a publishing house that's like not necessarily, like, I feel like it was probably this publishing house that had some of the trendy books we talked about earlier this year that were like, oh my god, they became the banished books shelf of mine. And also not having the sources, which is just, honestly, it makes you question whether you can trust the author if they aren't willing to say where they got their information from. But that said, I actually really liked this book. So this book, if you couldn't guess, tells you about the tarot. It's a great introduction book. It goes over a little bit of the history of it, and then it goes through each of the cards. It also goes into a few different aspects of it. So it talks about the suits as a whole, and then also the numerology, which I thought was really nice to just have that as a separate thing to analyze of like, okay, if you pull the 2 of whatever, it's going to typically mean this. That was kind of a nice reference page to have. And then of course she goes over the minor arcana, which goes over, you know, like kind of the Fool's Journey. And then she also went through each of the suits and explained each card individually, which was really nice. She also talks about how to do different spreads. She's got a number of them in there, and how to use the cards in spells. So overall, this book was actually extremely helpful. I was really surprised because the rune book was like kind of hit or miss-ish. Like, I remember not being like completely enthralled with it, but it wasn't enough that I really hated it. It was just like, I don't know, kind of an attitude about it. And like, I know that there's better ones, like Taking Up the Runes was a better book on the runes. But for the tarot, this is fantastic. It's easy to digest, which honestly could be a little biased given the last few books I've been reading. They've been very heavy and very just so boring. Like, they're just written in a very different style, and obviously this is much more modern, and sometimes I do prefer the modern where it's not so bogged down. Like, it's just something about the writing styles. I've gone through a lot of like the 1970s books recently, and they're not as easy to read. Like, they're trying to sound like a textbook, and textbook reading is boring. This is not quite like a blog post, but it's also not quite academic. It's a nice medium of just talking to you as if you were a regular person going to like a witchy course at a local shop, where they're presenting information, but also friendly, but you can tell that they know stuff. Honestly, this is going to be a huge reference book for me, because again, the way she goes about telling you how to use the cards and how to know them, it's really helpful instead of just, here's the card, here's what it means, or trying to tell this elaborate tale of how the cards connect. Like, it's just down to earth, really easy to get through, and honestly, like, I don't know, I would do a lot of the spells personally, because I don't know about splitting up decks. That's not my favorite thing. Personally, I would just like print off a picture of a card and use that instead of destroying decks. But that's your call. But even then, I mean, she tells you to have one specifically for spell work and one for like actually reading. But yeah, this book is fantastic. I will be using it a lot. as I start to learn the tarot. Again, I've used tarot before, it's just not one I use terribly often. Honestly, I switched over to the runes a lot more if I want to do a reading, and oftentimes if I'm gonna do cards, I usually lean towards oracle cards, and that's definitely not the same system. Similar, but not the same. So anyways, that is my thoughts on this book. I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. Thank you to my patrons. I'll have their names here on the screen. If you'd like to support me and get access to exclusive content, it is patreon.com/nightbelowcrafts. Make sure to like and subscribe. I post every single day, and until tomorrow, thank you so much for watching, and blessed be.